So we're here to talk a bit about the administrative state, and I really like talking about the administrative state, but we had some big stuff happening this weekend, so I'm just curious if you can tell us where you were when you heard the news about what happened on Saturday and what your initial thoughts were.
My wife and I were at home. We were preparing to meet up with our kids to go out to dinner, and my phone started blowing up. My friend Jason Chaffetz sent me a text saying, "Turn on the TV, just turn it on now, just turn it on now." And that's what happened. This is tragic.
Yeah. Well, you have been a strong ally of President Trump, but you and I both were not sure how conservative he would be and had some concerns about him when he first came on the stage. What do you think he showed in that moment? Like, what did you think that showed about his character, the way he handled being shot and in that moment?
It brought out in him really what is the best of him, the essence of what has made him a potent messenger for reform, his moral clarity and his moral courage and his willingness to stand up against great odds. That came out in spades.
Yeah, it was really just remarkable to see. I mean, I keep on thinking about it, and it's just truly a stunning moment that we're living through, and it was, I think we're all probably thinking a lot about how close we came to a much different scenario for the country, for the Republican Party, for the conservative movement, for everybody. It's just, we have a lot to be thankful to God for, I think, in this moment.
A lot to be thankful for, and you know, we should continue to keep him and our country in our prayers, because on the one hand, yes, they failed. And on the one, they failed to end President Trump's life. Now, tragically, they took the life of a brave, heroic soul, a fire chief, who was protecting his daughters, who died, literally shielding others, his family members, from bullets.
Yeah, Corey Campari, which is just, it's been beautiful to read the tributes to him, too. Okay, so what a couple of days. We also got this news this morning that Judge Eileen Cannon, the federal judge in Florida, has dismissed the classified documents case against President Trump. And interestingly enough, it was on the grounds, I haven't gotten to read anything yet, so I'm excited to read more about this. But I believe it was on the grounds that the Jack Smith appointment as special prosecutor was illegal.
Yes. And
this is something that Justice Clarence Thomas had raised in his recent, was it a concurrence? Yeah, in raising concerns about whether the appointment of special counsels is constitutional. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that issue. I don't know if you got to read Justice Thomas's concurrence.
Yeah, I did read his concurring opinion. I haven't had the chance yet to read this morning's court ruling from Florida. But I will say this, it's with good reason that the Constitution limits who can do what in the executive branch pretty aggressively. I mean, to have a significant pivotal role in any executive branch government, normally you need to be operating as someone who was appointed by the president, who's been confirmed by the Senate, and who also serves at the pleasure of the president. And it's with good reason that the Constitution limits that power, that somebody who couldn't take a job like that and carry out, because remember, the President of the United States is, in effect, the living embodiment of the entire executive branch. And it's important to have a connection of accountability, because it's the President who is accountable to the people. And if you don't have that, you've got a problem.
So, on that note, we've heard a lot from President Biden since the assassination attempt on President Trump's life. He's given speeches and been on TV, and he is calling for unity. I'm wondering what you think about his calls for unity and how they should be interpreted.
This is one of my pet peeves in politics. And you see it elsewhere to a degree, but my general rule of thumb is that when someone is speaking from a position of immense power, as he certainly is, a call for unity, unless it's accompanied by a description, an explanation, a formula, a prescription for how you get to unity, something that actually can and does tend to unify people, If you don't have that, then it's manipulation. It's a passive-aggressive backdoor way of saying, everyone unite behind me. Now, I think he had a real missed opportunity because he could have. I think this is the kind of moment where a president of the United States can and should say, hey, let's all get united at least around a couple of things. And here's what those things are. And here's what I'm going to do for my part in order to do that. I think that could have helped. Now, I have thought, and I thought since moments after the shooting took place, that one of the ways he could stop, I think everybody can agree that it'd be good to find ways in which we bring down the temperature a little bit. I think one way that he could have done that would have been to signal that he was directing Jack Smith to withdraw the federal prosecutions against Trump and that he was going to make requests of the governors of New York and Georgia for them to do the same. I think that's the kind of thing, the unifying principle, is saying, here's what we should unite behind, and here's what I'm personally going to do to get there. It's a missed opportunity that didn't go down that direction.
Yeah. I keep on thinking, I mean, we all know how politics is, and all's fair in politics, love and war.
It's all fair. Oh, yes, yes.
But, you know, and you definitely have, like, heated rhetoric from a lot of people. You'll hear Donald Trump call Joe Biden Sleepy Joe. And you hear Joe Biden say that all conservatives are a threat to the republic or a threat to democracy, a genuine threat, a literal threat, that they are seeking to destroy America, to destroy all of our freedoms. And so in addition to what you suggested, I think he personally should address the extremely awful and inappropriate rhetoric that has been coming from him. You might remember that red wedding speech that he gave where he said that all Republicans were a threat to the republic. You know, this is very serious stuff that's unbecoming of a president. And I understand that they insult, and certainly, you know, certainly Donald Trump insults. But there's a manner in how you insult, too, that is really important.
The red wedding speech. Okay, I just cut the...
Yeah, do you remember with
paints a great image,
the Marines on his side, and it was red in the back, and he was saying that we needed to do whatever it took to destroy half the country? So
nothing says I'm not a fascist quite like speaking against a backdrop like that and threatening to imprison your political opponents.
But just speaking completely apolitically, I just want to put an exclamation point on what you just said, Senator Lee, because the use of our courts to go after political opponents, yes, that has political ramifications. It might be helping the Democrat Party or hurting the Democrat Party. But what it does to the country is there's no way you can defend using courts to go after political opponents. It's what we associate with the Soviet Union, with Venezuela, with third world countries, not our country. And it's not just Jack Smith, who is under Joe Biden's authority, who is doing this, but really there are municipalities and places throughout the country that are using courts to settle political differences. And I do think that if people truly want to preserve the republic and tone down, you know, lower the temperature, they would immediately, as in by the end of today, stop all of those cases.
Immediately. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, my wife Sharon and I were in a couple of Latin American countries. And in both countries, we heard from their leaders, this is not the sort of thing we expect from the United States.
Right.
And it's the sort of thing that if we did, we would expect to be sanctioned by the United States for doing what was just done to President Trump. And the other thing they said, one of the head of state, this is a private conversation, so I'm not going to communicate, you know, exactly who it was, but he said, look, we are supposed to be following your lead, not you following our lead, and that's what's happening.
Amen. Okay, so we're here to talk about the administrative state. We're a very educated group here. I'm certainly, you know, I know everything there is about the administrative state. But could you give us what is the administrative state for dummies, you know, in case anyone doesn't know exactly what's going on there?
Yeah. Here's the simplest way of thinking of it. In your junior high civics class, you learned about the three branches of government. You've got the legislative branch, which in our federal system is Congress, makes the laws. You got the executive branch, headed by the president, enforces the laws, or it's supposed to. And you've got the judicial branch that interprets the laws where people disagree about what it means. You've got to go to somebody who can say, yeah, this is what that means, and then you can move forward. By far, the most dangerous of those three powers and of those three branches is the legislative branch. We know that for a number of reasons, both because it's the most critical in terms of government deciding what government is going to do. But you also know it because the Founding Fathers put the most guardrails around that. They gave that lawmaking power only to elected lawmakers, the branch of government most accountable to the people at the most regular intervals. You can fire all 435 members of the House every 2 years. You can fire a third of the members of the Senate every 2 years. That's why it's there. The administrative state is a type of quasi-fourth branch that exists technically within the executive branch. But it functions almost as a super legislative branch, and here's how it works. Starting in the late 1930s, when Congress got a whole lot of additional power, in part because the Supreme Court reimagined what regulating interstate commerce consists of, Congress found itself newly possessed of power to regulate labor, manufacturing, agriculture, mining, health, safety, and welfare, and a bunch of other stuff that they had never had before, untethered from military or, District of Columbia or something like that. U.S. government didn't touch those things. All of a sudden it could. So Congress started passing platitudes instead of laws. We shall have good law in area X, and we hereby delegate to commission or department or agency Y the power to make and interpret and enforce good laws in area X. So think of it this way. We shall have fair trade practices in the United States. Congress passes a law that says that. And we hereby give the Federal Trade Commission the power to make and interpret and enforce their own law. So little by little, this moved forward. Some more familiar examples. We shall have clean air, and we hereby give the EPA the power to decide what clean air is, what pollution is, how much you can pollute before we fine you and throw you in prison, and what kind of pollution is more tolerable or less tolerable than others. You've got the law being made by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats who work in these executive branch agencies. Now, to put it in perspective, Molly, I've got these two monuments to law in my office. Anytime you're in Washington, come by, room 361A of the Senate Russell office building. I've got a short stack of documents which consists of the laws passed by Congress last year, usually a few hundred to a few thousand pages. The other stack is about 100,000 pages, and it consists of the executive branch agency, the administrative state laws, what we call the Federal Register, the cumulative annual index of all these laws that come about 100,000 pages. Now, those laws could put you in prison if you don't obey them. They can fine you millions of dollars. They can shut down your business. And yet they're written not by elected lawmakers, but by men and women not of your own choosing. That's a problem. That's the administrative state. That's why it's so dangerous. And that's why I've made it my life's mission to dismantle it.
It seems when people are very frustrated by the government that it is, in fact, this administrative state that is the focus of their ire, even if they don't understand that. And Congress willingly handing over this authority, and Congress is the Article I branch. It is supposed to be supreme. Willingly handing over its authority to these unaccountable regulatory regimes is really something that has caused a lot of problems for Americans. It was supercharged, this ability of this unconstitutional fourth branch of government to destroy Americans' lives was supercharged in part through Supreme Court jurisprudence. And what is, when people talk about the administrative state and this authority that they have that they shouldn't have, they frequently talk about Chevron deference. What is that? Chevron
Deference is a term drawn from a 1984 Supreme Court ruling called Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council. In a nutshell, what it said is, we, the courts, will defer to a federal agency's interpretation of the laws it's charged with administering. We will defer to those. We will allow those to stand, even if it's not the best interpretation of the law. If it's, as long as it's not unreasonable, we will defer to it. And then they developed a set of loose standards to determine what a reasonable interpretation was. But even in that, it was a very deferentially applied. So basically, it's heads we win, tails you lose. The executive branch agency always won. They always won in how they interpreted the statute. So Federal Trade Commission, for example, or EPA. If there was doubt as to what clean air meant, as used in the Clean Air Act, it would always go to the government.
And so what happened this year to the Chevron deference?
In the Loper-Bright ruling, it came out about 10 days ago, the Supreme Court said no more. They said this is ridiculous. We don't. Courts have tools that they use to interpret law. We call those canons of statutory construction, different formulas. Our laws consist of words. Our words have meaning, and we have rules that judges are trained in using to figure out what they mean, where there are ambiguities in the law. And they said, there's just not a good reason for us to just defer to the government on its own interpretation when we are the interpreters. That is our job to do, and that's what we're going to do.
So does this mean the battle against the administrative state is over, and that people who care about constitutional governance won, and we can all go home now?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Molly, because the answer is emphatically no. There is a grave temptation on the part of all of us. You remember that great scene in The Lion King? Or they're saying, no king, no king. There is a grave temptation we can fall into to say, oh, Chevron's gone. That means we're all free. But that's not at all the case. Chevron is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It is only the end of the beginning. And it's the end of the beginning only if we make sure that it is. In other words, we have to take the next step. All this does is it says that the administrative state, when it makes laws that can throw you in prison, laws that can get you fined, that can shut down your business, they actually define crimes all the time. If all we do is say the courts are now going to interpret whether they are correctly interpreting federal law, we haven't really gained that much. The underlying injury to the constitutional structure is the delegation in the first instance to the executive branch agency of the lawmaking power. The lawmaking power, so that the political philosophers and the legal philosophers that inspired the founding generation, including, for example, Montesquieu, they were very, very firm on this principle, which is that the lawmaking power is not something that can be delegated. The lawmaker's job, once the lawmaker is chosen to make laws, the lawmaker's job is to make law, not other lawmakers. So that's what we have to tackle next. We have to get Congress to make law and to stop delegating. Now, it's a complicated problem because, again, we're producing 100,000 pages of new law every single year. By the way, quick anecdote, and then I'll get back to the main question. A few years ago, we tried to figure out how many crimes are on the books, how many federal crimes you can commit. We asked the Congressional Research Service, whose job it is, to tell us that. It took them a while. They got back to us and they said, okay, the answer is unknown and unknowable, but it's at least 300,000. The reason it was that many, but unknown and unknowable, was because of these administratively created crimes. That's spooky. Anyway, so very complicated problem. There is an elegant, almost perfect solution that would deal with most of the problem. And it's one legislative proposal called the REINS Act. It's R-E-I-N-S, Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny. In one fell swoop, it would reinvigorate Article 1, Section 1, and Article 1, Section 7, which are the ones that tell us how you make a federal law, that only Congress can make federal law. And it says that these executive branch agency rules, the major rules imposing legal obligations on the part of the public, that are significant in the way they regulate, could take effect only after they've been enacted by Congress. If a genie appeared to me and said you can pass any bill that's been introduced in Congress in the last 15 years, it would be the REINs Act, 100 times out of 100. That would do more to reinvigorate American freedom and our constitutional form of government than anything else I can think of. And I think it needs to be item number one for the Trump administration to tackle legislatively next year.
I saw some of your colleagues after the Loper-Bright decision came out. They were freaking out and saying, you don't understand, we haven't been getting into the nitty-gritty of what the laws are for a very long time. We defer to these experts in the bureaucracy to handle everything. First of all, I love the faith that Democrat senators have in the experts in the bureaucracy, something not shared by many Americans. But it was just kind of funny to watch them say, no, we don't want to do our jobs here. We've been not doing our jobs for a very long period of time. So this would help them actually do their jobs.
Exactly. It's the new idolatry. And this, by the way, is the secret to Trump's sauce. This is the secret to why Trump has been successful. It's also the secret to why we need Trump so much today, and the secret to why they're doing everything they can, why they tried to imprison him, why somebody tried to kill him, why they're pushing back as hard as they could. Look, Donald Trump is an anomaly, to say the least. He's an enigma, especially to the left. He came along as someone who entered the scene at the top level, ran for president, was elected president, from completely outside of the political universe. The only modern president you can think of who fits that description. He came along and identified a whole bunch of problems with government, problems that he had had no role in creating, unlike pretty much anybody else in the political system. And so when that happened, and he showed up with all this moral courage and clarity, they rebelled against him. They said, we cannot have this. We cannot have it. Now, the other side does everything they can. This also explains the lawfare. They do everything they can to denigrate that, to demonize it, because the left, remember, believes that, first of all, they are the rule of law. When they talk about the rule of law, they don't think about it in terms of it's all better if we follow the law, even if we disagree with it. For the left, the progressive is the law, so whatever the law is in their mind the rule of law. They will then denigrate and demonize anyone who comes along who pushes back on that, who challenges those assumptions. Anyone who is against them and their policy agenda is against the rule of law. By the same token, any Supreme Court justice who refuses to recuse from a case where they don't think they will like the ruling, they will push back on them and try to demean their credibility, pushing so far as even to delegitimize the court as a whole, so that they can pack the Supreme Court and change its composition. At the end of the day, these guys bastardize the concept of the rule of law to the point that it's really aggressive. It's kind of a fascist approach to governance. But that's why they're pushing back so hard against Donald Trump. And by the way, it also ties into the administrative state. One of my first reactions after I got the news the other night, and I commented this evening on it, is that things like this would not happen. We wouldn't have violence erupt, violent protests and rallies as often as we do surrounding presidential elections if we didn't put so many eggs in that basket. If we hadn't made the federal government far more powerful than it was ever intended to be, and if we hadn't made the presidency itself more powerful than it was ever intended to be.
And I think that is the hatred against Trump, is that unlike every single president for generations, he fought the administrative state more than anyone else. And you might remember that the first impeachment against President Trump was because he disagreed with the interagency consensus on foreign policy. As my husband likes to say, I don't remember voting for the interagency consensus at any point. But that is how seriously they view it, as a threat. They view themselves as the permanent ruling class of Washington, D.C., and anyone who thinks that the Constitution, which sets out actual elected positions to oversee the executive branch or to make our laws, anyone who views it that way, that's the actual threat. So, final question.
It was a perfect call.
Just real quick final question. Is there anything that the executive should do to rein in the administrative state?
Yes. All right, so look, first and foremost, the chief executive, the President of the United States as chief executive officer of the U.S. government, first thing he can do is to put the right personnel in place so that we stop getting these ridiculous expansions of federal regulatory power. You look at how many aspects of your life are micromanaged in ways that they shouldn't be. Who misses real light bulbs, by the way? I'm sick and tired of the light bulbs that are terrible. And
me, very much.
Who misses shower heads that can do the job? Washing machines, dishwashers, I mean, everything, all this minutia in your life that's micromanaged by executive branch pinheads. And I say that with all due respect to pinheads. Trump gets in there, and that's part of why Project 2025 is so important. The personnel is policy, and so if he starts on day one with the right personnel in charge, you can have better policy. But the other main thing that he can do, and this is the far more important thing that Trump can do as president, I hope, and I'm going to continue to ask him, to make passage of the REINS Act not just a top legislative priority, but something that he will attach to his agenda to such a degree that he's willing to say, I will not sign must-pass legislative vehicle A, B, or C unless you attach the REINS Act to it. One good opportunity for that might well be the next debt ceiling increase package, which will come due shortly after he becomes president. We actually had a great chance. I worked with the House Freedom Caucus to work this in there in Limit, Save, Grow last year. We got it right to that point. We had something Democrats wanted, Wall Street wanted, meaning to raise the debt ceiling. We said, okay, if you're going to do that, there needs to be some economically stimulative measures and some fiscally restrained measures. And the REINS Act got put in there. We could have gotten that passed, even with the Democratic-controlled Senate and White House, had certain legislative leaders not decided to punt on second down. But if under the leadership of President Trump, if he were to say, I'm going to veto Bill X unless it has the REINS Act in there, we'll get it passed. And remember this, if he does that, that's worth everything else. That is the reform in the administrative state, because at that moment forward, it's not the administrative state. It's legislators elected to make law who are making the law, and we've achieved a lot of the victory at that point.
Thank you very much. Senator Mike Lee, keep up the great work.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. And